The question is, having friends that you no longer feel, the word Cyrus was using was nourished by, and then the need, therefore, to transition out of the relationships, even though there's still love, but any contact tends to pull your energy down. So, I'll start by sort of the opposite side of it, which is that Yogananda says that loyalty is the first law of God. And I've seen Kriyananda put enormous emphasis. I have to sneeze. There's nothing worse than sneeze. Yeah, thank you, Ron. No, I think the name was Yeah, I once interrupted a long and very deep meditation with an amplified sneeze, which pretty much, cut the congregation in half for quite a few months for fear that it would ever happen again. But so Swamiji's always put a lot of emphasis on loyalty, and he himself, as an example, is just extraordinarily loyal to people in the sense of always being available. And even if they don't treat him well, as Swamiji said, he has a quirk in his nature, which is the way he feels about people is not affected by the way they feel about him. He calls it a quirk. At the same time, what you're really talking about is the responsibility that you're beginning to feel for your own expanding consciousness. I mean, am I correct in that? Because you use the word nourish, but then you also said whenever I talk to them, my energy goes down. So when you, just to clarify, when you use the word nourished, you talk about, well, they're not giving me anything anymore, so I'm going to leave them. It sounds more selfish than you really meant it, I think. But what I heard you say is that now that you're doing what you're doing with your life, that when you come together, it doesn't support the directions you're really trying to go. Is that fair?
Oh yes, not necessarily support my spiritual path, but actual interactions with them aren't meaningful.
It takes your...
I still have a very strong love.
Right. But you said it takes your energy down, is that true? Because that was the key that I was going to work from, because that is the key. There's a word in Sanskrit which we use a lot, which is the word Dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A. And it's sometimes defined as duty, but duty is too cold a word for it. What Dharma really is those actions which take us towards self-realization. And in the scriptures of India, they'll often talk about Dharma, and just in conversation, we'll often talk about Dharma, which is, in fact, one of the mottos of Ananda as an organization is where there is Dharma, there is victory. Which means if you follow those actions which lead towards self-realization, everything will always work out right. And if you don't, it won't. Because you get out of harmony with the universe. Now, there's also times in our lives when dharmas conflict, which is that you'll have a certain dharma that you follow, but then it may be contradicted by a higher dharma. And so there's another principle that we say, which is that a higher dharma always replaces a lower dharma. So that in a certain context, this may be exactly the right thing, the right principle for you to follow, but then circumstances may change and this may be the right principle. Examples are very much like what you're talking about now. It's dharma to be loyal to friends, especially friends who have been loyal to you. I mean, people that are more than just acquaintances. Let me phrase it differently. The people with whom you really have a soul connection. That it's not just, I'm thinking of male-female relationships, what Yogananda would call a union between a nice shade of lipstick and a bow tie, which is just sort of random connections that are not based on deep affinity. So if you're just working with casual relationships where there really never has been a deep affinity, these things just come and go. But even if it is a soul relationship where there's a real affinity, but it no longer takes you where you're really trying to go, then the duty of that friendship becomes less important than the duty to your higher consciousness. So that then you have to ask yourself whether this is really a question of consciousness or whether this is just a matter of convenience and preference. And if it really is a matter of consciousness, which is what I was hearing you say, not even a question of formal, they don't go to church, they don't meditate, they don't, but just vibrationally, it doesn't take me where I'm trying to go. It doesn't take me toward expanded consciousness. Then that's your first duty. Your first duty is always toward expanded consciousness. And this concept of Dharma, the highest Dharma, justifies all sorts of things, like a man abandoning his family to go to the Himalayas, or turning away even from lifelong friends and companions, or standing up to your family. If your parents, for example, if you need to, if they're asking things of you that are really not your Dharma, but they want them for their own reasons, and even though honor thy father and thy mother is a biblical commandment, if in doing so you dishonor the spirit within you, then it's no longer your Dharma. Yogananda talked about it in terms of the difference between Dharma and being sentimental. When Paramhansa Yogananda met Dr. Lewis, who was Yogananda's first disciple in America, Dr. Lewis was the president of the Rosicrucian Society at that time. And had spent many, many years being engaged with the Rosicrucians and had, a long built-up responsibility with the Rosicrucian Society. But when he met Yogananda, he just felt immediately that his relationship with Yogananda transcended anything that other society had given him. But yet he felt torn because, he built all this up. And they were depending on him. So you would look at it and you would think, well, this was important. Yogananda's answer was, you mustn't be ruled by sentiment. And it's you don't think about, it's not a word that we often use in English in exactly that way. But sentiment is just kind of an attachment that's based on habits and comfortable feelings. And Yogananda said, sometimes you have to be very stern. You can't just be sentimental about things. These are my people. These have always been my friends. We've had such good times together. If there's really a higher voice saying, you must pay attention to this higher call, and you must arrange your life in such a way so as that you move toward it. Now, one has to be very careful, but unafraid simultaneously. You have to be careful that you're not just finding it inconvenient. But if it's a genuine soul experience, a genuine experience that these are just not my people right now, or sometimes you have to just plead with God not to make you choose to. I've been in situations at times where I just say to the Lord, this is not an option. You can't make me choose. Because this is an impossible choice. I can't forsake this for the sake of that, so you simply have to make both things possible. And invariably it has worked out that way. If I know that's really Dharma and not just fear speaking. And again, these are all very, very, these are razor's edge kinds of questions. Because many people who love you, sincerely love you, as well as they can, will still not be capable, will not be wise enough, or selfless enough. Maybe they're quite selfless, but they just may not be wise enough to perceive what is really best for you. So it's often a test of our own dedication to be able to say, I can turn my back on this. Then the thing to do is to be very kind in your heart, even if you can't be kind in your actions. And to be very clear within yourself that this is not about my being better or their being worse. Just try to weed out of your inner consciousness any sense of judgment. And also recognize how very interwoven is the pattern of life. And I recall when I had to give up a very close friendship because it really was fighting with my spiritual life. And this may not be your issue, but it was mine at the time. I said to Swamiji, I said, among other things, I feel like, how can I really trust myself? Because I was so committed to this friendship, and now it has become a burden to me. And he said, well, you've taken it as far as you can go. And he said, and then he said, perhaps, maybe the karma is over. Maybe you've completed the karma. And then he smiled sort of sweetly and said, but I don't think so. Just giving me a tiny little hope for a moment. He said, but I don't think so. He said, but you've taken it as far as you can go. You have to grow in other ways before this particular relationship can progress any farther. So he said, for now, put it on the shelf. And I really appreciated that, because then I wasn't really repudiating anything. And I wasn't, it was just nothing. It was just, this relationship can't go any farther. And then he said, you both have to grow in different ways. I mean, you have to have other circumstances in which to grow before the potential of this particular relationship can really come forward. And then he said, maybe it'll be later in this lifetime, maybe in future lifetimes, because who knows. So you also have to just stand back and say, this is a dance, like this. And like an elaborate contra dance or a square dance where you just kind of come around, and then after a long time you come back to the same people. After you've even forgotten that they were in the dance, and then all of a sudden you're face to face with some partner you had a long time ago. And if you don't know the pattern, you don't know how you ever got back there. So just sort of be ready to see them again, but also ready to just let them go. It's generally better, it's a toss-up about whether you explain. It generally doesn't work to say, well, you see, the reason I'm not going to see you anymore is because you pull me down. Generally that doesn't work. Generally it's better to be just wean yourself away by having it be inconvenient to see them, make other plans, start taking piano lessons at the time that you usually meet together, just set up some, if possible, just set up some kind of impersonal situation. And gradually, you'll just fall away, usually. And pray for people, especially people that you really love. And here's one more piece of it that's very important, which is the absolute best service you can do to the people you love is to take care of your own consciousness. Because the more elevated your consciousness becomes, and it will become more elevated if you're diligent in nurturing it, it's growth. The more elevated your consciousness becomes, the more you will be able to bless those that you love. And even more, the more automatically they will be blessed. This is what Swamiji always said to us in the early years when some of us were dealing with parents who were not happy. Especially when he recommended to us that we spend Christmas at Ananda. And at that time, so many of us were in our early 20s, and our parents just, not my parents because we were Jewish, it was very nice, it was very convenient for me. But the other families where Christmas was a big deal, it was a really big thing for those kids not to go home at Christmas. But Swamiji said their egos will be very sad and their souls will rejoice, was his answer. Because their souls will know why you're doing it. Because Master said that Christmas is too sacred a time to dissipate in worldly company, in worldly activities. That you need to use Christmas in a deeply spiritual way. And it's wise to. And he spoke more strongly because he had renunciate disciples in his own ashram, and he could say it. At Ananda it was more like considerate. But he said, your parents may be quite distressed with you, but their souls will rejoice. Because their souls will see you deepening your relationship with Christ consciousness, and they'll know that they're going to get in on some of that blessing, the more expanded you get. So if you also just bless them, and depending how deep the ties are, is how profoundly you can do that. I mean, how actively you'll feel to do that. Sometimes some things, of course, on one's own altar at home, one can put pictures of the people you love. I used to also put the pictures of people that I was blessing, I used to put them, I just opened the picture frames where the masters were, and then I'd stuff all my people into close there, and I'd close the frames up again. I mean, it was funny, actually, I opened an old picture frame recently and found all sorts of things in there that I'd forgotten all about. But it's a very nice way to just feel that you're just blessing them, and nonetheless, they're sort of a little bit out of your life, but still, you have them there. And pray intensely to Divine Mother to facilitate it for you. You know, I'm not doing this out of anything except a desire to uplift my consciousness, so open the doors and make it work for me. Does that help? Is there more that you need to say, or is that enough?
Well, I guess part of the issue is one-on-one meetings with friends, which is one of what my social activity has been so far, versus community settings. And somehow I find last year I've been drifting more towards a community setting, somehow deep one-on-one conversations with people over 3 or 2 hours on a weekday evening, or any evening, even when they're nourishing, can be a lot of energy. And I somehow feel I relate better to a community. Monday night vegetarian community dinner that I go to, or a discussion group, or something like that. These friends I'm talking about would be just great in those settings. Not because I wanted to talk to them personally, but I can deal with all the different energies in the group, because I don't feel on the spot.
Well, you're describing a person who's just transitioning. And in the process, I mean, thank God. It'd be horrible if you were describing a person who's just sort of sitting there, just stuck. I mean, you're describing yourself, that was what I mean. You're describing a person, yourself, who's just discovering new realities about yourself. And as you step into something new, just like when you grow out of your clothes, you know, you have these gray clothes that you've always loved, but they don't fit you anymore. Or for a woman like me, whose dress size hasn't changed that much, but they're no longer my spirit. You know, I just wonderful things that I used to wear every day, I just can't wear anymore because they just don't fit me anymore. They don't fit the persona that's me. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that some other energy has come forward. So, I mean, an obvious thing is what you just yourself suggested, which is try to include them in your other groups. Yeah, or as I say, develop different habits. Oh, I now get up at 4 in the morning, so I have to go to bed at 7. You know? Just things that are included.
You know, I have to interject something there, because that one works, because I really do have to get up at 4 in the morning now because of my work obligations. And it seems to work. People don't call me. You know what I mean?
It's very impersonal.
Unplugging the phone instead of bad energy.
Yeah, if you really need to. But also just be comfortable and interested in who you become. Most people, so many people, just try to set their habits and are afraid to change them. So Yogananda said you should change all your habits regularly. He said just for the sake of doing them, you should just change the way you do everything every once in a while, so that it doesn't just become something subconscious. The subconscious is so strange. A friend of mine he's a man in his 50s, and he had an operation on his shoulder, and he went under anesthesia, which kind of weirded his brain out for a few days. And the next day after the operation, or 2 days or so, he combed his hair. And he looked at it and he realized he had combed his hair just like he used to do in junior high, but hadn't done since junior high. You know, just this sort of like subconscious piece of him came out, and he just made himself look like he did when he was 13. And he didn't even realize it, and he saw what was happening. And these are we have these deep unconscious things, and it's habit is a friend, but it's also good to keep ourselves limber by always shifting things around. I mean, you don't want to say to your friends, well, it's time to change all my friends. You know? But it is. Any other comments or thoughts? You know, also, and I'm not sure whether you were asking this or not, but sometimes also when we're in transition, intimacy is not as easy as it used to be, because for several reasons. It may be that if we're transitioning upward, we are getting in touch with things that are too subtle that they're the wrong vibration to share with people, the people that used to be able to share everything with. Now you're doing something that's too subtle, and they're not on the right wavelength to hear it. It's a little bit rude, but it's, Jesus says, cast not your pearls before swine. And it's not that your friends are swine, but when you have something that's really delicate, it just may be that people that used to be really open with, you just can't be open with anymore. And you may not have anything else to say. And that makes it difficult. And if one is just transitioning, what you're transitioning into may be not articulatable. And so there's just like no words. You just find yourself sort of in some new reality without the capacity to say it. And often there's an instinctive realization that if I reveal this too soon, I'm going to lose it. Because it's like a little plant. If you pull up the roots, if you pull it up and look at the roots, you have to just leave it in the dark until it gets a little straight. And sometimes if you bring out something you're just barely understanding yourself to someone who doesn't have an understanding of it themselves, they'll either ask you questions you can't answer, which will plant doubts in your own mind, or they'll ridicule it, or they'll dismiss it. And even if a lot of this isn't even conscious, there's just a feeling of having nothing to say. And that's very hard, especially if what you're moving into is very precious to you. I've lost many friends over the years to just that. They're wonderful people, but they're not on this wavelength. And as I become more and more refined on these notes, I can't relate to the other notes. Then there comes, you sort of figure out a way later, but you just can't be the same. Because if you tell them what you really think, there's just no way to talk about it. So that too is a factor.
Another thing you can do is to just be real present in what you're discovering, because they're not going to relate to what your wavelength. Just really talk about all the spirituality and those kinds of things, and they'll be like, huh?
Oh, you mean it's another way to end friendships? Yeah. Yeah. Just tell them all about the things and have them decide that you're too weird. That is also an option, and that does work. There was a joke that I might have been a Reader's Digest or somewhere, but this woman traveled all over the United States, or maybe even all over the world, by herself. And someone said, well, weren't you ever afraid? And she said, no. And she said, well, what would happen if a strange man came up and started a conversation with you? She said, oh, I had 3 little words that always just worked. I just said, are you saved? And that usually ended the conversation. So yeah, you can proselytize for the latest weird thing that you're into. And I'll get rid of it, yeah. I was having dinner with a friend of mine once, Seva, who's a lifelong friend, and these were years ago. And we were just sitting in this restaurant, and for some reason it was a very just materialistic vibration. It was just a restaurant, but there was the energy in there. Somehow everybody in there was really into things that she and I were not into. There was just this avaricious energy. And we were just quietly having our pasta there. And I said to her, if our physical form looked as different as our actual thoughts and perception of reality were, we would look like Martians in this room. They would all just be screaming. But because we had the same faces, we could just eat our pasta, and nobody knew what utterly different realities we were living in. And so that's just the way things are. It's a great art to be able to relate across, and it's an art worth cultivating. But also there's a need to just hold yourself to yourself. You just the way, Jesus says, cast not your pearls before swine. He couldn't have said it any more bluntly than that. That there's some things that are just not meant to be shared because people don't get it. And you demean yourself, and also it's not good for them. Because it's confusing. You do them a favor too. It's not good karma for the swine to rend the pearls up, So it's better not tempt them. Yeah. Yes.
I'm new here. It's my first. morning, but just listening to the questions and the answers you've given, it appears to me that there's sort of maybe a us-them point of view, that in order to achieve spiritual awareness, you need to be surrounded by people of similar interests or...
Oh, rats. I was trying so hard not to come across with that, and there it was. That's a dilemma, the us-them idea. It's a real dilemma in this respect. We're all children of God. And Yogananda used to say, and he was a self-realized master, and he would say to his disciples, he said, remember, he said, God loves you just as much as he loves Jesus or Krishna or Buddha. You know, God, the divine is equal. The divine is equally present, and love is omnipresent. There's no gradations of it. No one is really inherently more spiritual than anyone else. It's impossible, because we're dealing with an absolute reality. So there is no us and them in that respect. At the same time, it's self-evident that not everybody's interested in the same things. And it's self-evident that people put out energy in different directions. I drive here from our community, which is 2 miles down El Camino, and the Old Pro Sports Bar. You know, it's just on the other side of the page. I've never been in the Old Pro Sports Bar. I think I actually did once. I was near it and I actually looked in the door, because you know, you drive by this 1,000 times and you're curious, wanting to know what was in there. And I don't ever want to go into the Old Pro Sports Bar. Because it doesn't vibrate on the wavelength that I vibrate on.
And is that harmful to you?
No. Let me finish the thought. But no, you're right to interrupt me. But let me finish the thought. Then you may challenge it. Because I have an alto voice when I sing. I can't sing soprano. I can't sing bass. I'm not tall enough to reach certain high cupboards. You know, I don't play volleyball very well. I mean, there's just things. I do certain things I can't do others. I don't enjoy big television screens. I don't like to drink. It's just I don't like hamburgers, even if they're cheap. You know, none of those things are pleasures to me. So for me to go in there to do the things that people would go in there to do would not be a pleasure for me. Actually, it would be painful for me, just because of the way I am. To take some of those people and make them sit here and chant and meditate with us would be equally painful for them. Because they just, you know, invite them to dinner and serve them grilled tofu would be despicable. There's a Far Side cartoon. There's a Far Side cartoon where you see primitive people and they're hunting and they felled some animal and then all the primitive people are kind of spinning like this. And it said, alas, they had accidentally hunted down the dreaded tofu beast. But it's that we're doing different things, okay? Now, if you want to be good at something, anything, you have to discipline yourself to do it. And this is the paradox of spiritual life, is that even though it's ours already, and Yogananda used the word realization, which is a very subtle and a marvelous word, because realization is, you don't create anything, you simply realize it. You wake up to what exists. And so you realize the self. The self is the infinite within you. And you realize it. And you realize that you've always been that. You've never been anything else, but you didn't remember. You forgot. But the art of remembering the self is like any other art. It's like learning to paint or learning to sing or learning to play basketball. You know those basketball players that are featured on those big screens in the pro bar, cannot do everything. They have rejected an enormous number of life options in order to get very good at that, right? Because if they did everything, they would not be that good at that. Spiritual life is just the same. And, they have to pay attention to their diet, they have to pay attention to their mental attitudes, they have 1,000 things where they have to give up options in order to attain this. And that's what you have to do spiritually, too. And so, of course, there's an us and them, because there are us who are trying to attain this goal, and there are them who are trying to attain other goals. Now, of course, it's enormously tempting to put value judgments on that, And let's not be stupid. You know, there are value judgments because from this point of view, that certain ways of living ultimately will give you more happiness than other ways will give you. Certain ways are more happiness producing on the timeline of the tried and true over centuries and centuries. I'm not just saying you have to live my way. I mean, there are certain divine laws. But those divine laws are not dogmas, they're not church dictated, they're not rules, and they're not institutional. And that's why I use the word Dharma, that action which expands your consciousness. Now, I think, you know, a lot of those basketball players are right on track with their Dharma. You know, they're doing exactly what they need to do because all that effort to become those great basketball players, and who knows, maybe some of those guys sitting in the pro bar are doing exactly what they need to do to expand their consciousness because it's exactly the experience they have to have in order to move forward. Okay? But even though it moves them forward, it would not move me forward. It would move me, well, I have to use the word backwards, but that's where it would move me, definitely move me away from where I'm trying to go now. Okay? Is that enough of an answer? Okay. So do you want to protest in any other way? Feel free, I don't mind.
I'm just sort of wrestling with the idea of, you know, we're here to sort of live life and experience it and learn from it. But I get the sense that I may be totally wrong here, but, you know, that you're almost like trying to be monks on a mountaintop kind of a thing.
Well, I am.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that everyone should. But you know, I've had a long time to make these choices. I've been doing this for 30 years and I've worked on it. And a whole lot of times I change my direction. And a lot of times I'm wrong. And many times I have to come off the mountain and go get some stuff and bring it up there. Because I skipped it and I need it. Because it's just, you know, I'm out there and I'm not where I should be. And the longer I live, the more I realize how utterly individual the path is.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I just don't want to leave my present life in order to attain spiritual awareness. And I'm wondering if I have to do that in order to do that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And only you can answer that. You are the only person who will know. And because the question came up, all I had to say was you have to have the courage to recognize when that's what's being asked of you. Wait, I lost a thought. Let me find it again. Mahatma Gandhi summarized it perfectly. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi was extremely well known for being very, very austere. But his advice was, he said, do not ever give up something that you find pleasurable until you have replaced it with something that you find more pleasurable. And that's absolutely perfect. Because but you also have to understand, and this is what really happens, that as you live in certain ways, you begin to redefine what's pleasurable. You know, my 10-year-old nephew is staying with us now for a few weeks, and I'm not sure if any of you are actually aware of Pokemon cards. But Pokemon cards is this thing that children are doing right now. And it's really looks to me like one of the dopiest things. Just dopey thing.
It's really fun, actually.
Yeah, you're a little younger than I think. Are passionate about this thing, but you know, after a while, will they still have the same passion for it? You know, your pleasures change, and your pleasures change from an adult. I'm a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian now since I was about 19 years old. I don't remember this, but my sister says to me, boy, if you could become a vegetarian, anyone could become a vegetarian. Because she remembers a period of time that I don't remember when I was growing up. We were growing up together when apparently I was quite a carnivore without my even remembering. But now, you know, this is not a discipline for me. There's not the slightest amount of discipline, and there has never been any discipline. I just lost my taste for it. So there was no, but there have been other things where a deliberate cutting off was required, because even though in the moment I wasn't having a lot of fun, it wasn't very pleasurable, I knew that if I could change the habit, there was a lot more pleasure in the changed habit than there was going to be by staying where I was. Of course, anybody who's ever accomplished anything knows that there's that period of hard work. You know, going to the gym is not a lot of fun for me. I don't enjoy the gym, but I love the result of going to the gym. So I do it because of the result, not because of the experience. So you have to do that. But then you're living on two levels. You're living on what it feels like right now for the sake of what it's going to feel like long term. But you should only make those shifts as they occur to you. Because if you force them out of your intellect, well, it does great. It accomplishes nothing. And it creates all this complexity, you know, where you just got, I should, I shouldn't, I ought to, I want to, you know. It's just, if you want to do it, and then stop doing it when you stop wanting to. But have the courage to consider that I might not want to do this for the rest of my life, and have the honesty to listen when that voice begins to whisper to you, are you really having fun? And then it just kind of goes very naturally, and every gain you make is a real one, rather than practicing what we call going back yoga, where you just stretch yourself out really thin with too much hard discipline that isn't related to yourself, and then you're going back. And then you're just right back where you were. You know, a certain amount of that. All of this is fine art, just like I was saying to Cyrus, you know, all this is very... And I have always said it's better to sin enthusiastically in public than to... sin is not a word we use too much since you're doing, I shouldn't say it, but to sin enthusiastically in public than to sin shamefacedly in the privacy of your own home. If you're going to do it, just do it. Let it be. And just be yourself. Because otherwise you have two problems. You have a habit that might not be so good for you, plus you have the shame of doing it. At least let's not have shame. Let's just have habits. And slowly they'll overcome. It's just not that bad. There's nothing we can do that's that bad. It all works out in the end. That's why Swamiji says it all washes out in super consciousness, so don't worry about it. When Yogananda said, when ecstasy comes, everything goes. So, that was when Swamiji said, oh, sir, help me overcome my desire for good food. Kriyananda's always been a gourmet. Kriyananda's the founder of Ananda. He's my direct teacher. And Yogananda said, oh, when ecstasy comes, everything goes. Don't worry about the small things. Just love God. That's what counts. You know, what really counts and what's really important is love, kindness, respect, and acceptance of God's love, self-worth, self-love. You know, that's what's important, and how you live. The scriptures are filled with stories of saints in unexpected places. Because that's just, it's your consciousness, not your form. Work on that. And with that, you must be very, very attentive. You know, there's no margin on that one. You know, that's the one where you have to be very disciplined. But your habits are much less important than the meannesses of the mind and of the heart. Those are the ones you have to be careful of. But even this, people in the old pro know that. I mean, everybody knows that. If you're mean to people, nothing works. Whether you're doing it at a bar or doing it at a temple, you have to be kind. Yes.
And how do you explain lawyers?
How do I explain lawyers? Some of my best friends are lawyers. Are you a lawyer?
No, but...
Is anyone in the room a lawyer? How frank can I be?
There seem to be a lot of people who are, shall we say, ignorant of the spiritual life, and financially successful, and perhaps vicious, who...
Oh, I see what you mean. How come bad people get to win? Why do bad people win? Reincarnation is really a wonderful philosophy because, well, let me think about why do bad. Let me just take it more seriously because it's a very good question.
I'm not sure that is the question, but the question is, why are there mean people who are happy? I don't know if it's why is it that bad people have good things happen to them.
Yeah, how come
why are there mean people who are happy?
Well, you don't know what really what it feels like to be someone else until you
Yeah,
really are them.
sure.
And unless you have the capacity to truly be in someone's consciousness, you can only judge from what you see. And often, if you're really sensitive, you can feel. Happiness is also a very relative word. I mean, people may say they're happy because they are happy, you know. A vicious lawyer may really like to win, and he just gets such a rush out of winning that he feels really, really happy every time he wins, and he doesn't think about the carnage he may be wreaking on many people's life. He just thinks about the rush of energy and the triumph. And the odd thing is, you see, he might not be wrong, because this gets complicated. Because we all function at the level of consciousness we're on. I mean, that's self-evident, but it still just has to be said. We function at the level of consciousness we're on. We experience life at the vibration we have. And when people talk to us, this is what you were saying to you, Cyrus, about your friends. When people talk about a vibration that you have never experienced at all, it just means nothing to you. And so if you talk to someone who's very avaricious and whose philosophy of life is if it works, do it, you know, if it gets more from me, then it's a good idea. And you have some sort of selfless, altruistic person that says, oh, don't make that product. Think about the rainforest. And the person says, you know, if I didn't chop down the tree, someone else was. So I'm just going to get in there and get it first. And they say, oh, think about the birds. And this person's just like, whoo. No way. But the avaricious person may not actually be wrong in their own context. Because the alternative to their avarice may be, let's say, drinking themselves into a stupor every night and just sitting there. So for them to suddenly become greedy, they're progressing. Greed is progress for them. And of course, once they, get a lot for themselves and just keep taking for themselves and discover that no matter how much stuff I get, it doesn't really satisfy my deep nature, and golly, I seem to have alienated my kids and my friends and my wife and everyone else in the process, you begin to think maybe there's something else happening. Experience teaches you what works and what doesn't work. However, experience does not necessarily teach you in the lifespan of one body. And so when you try to make it work from birth to death, it doesn't. Because the learning curve also is much longer than that. I mean, with all due respect, think about yourself. The learning curve is small. It is there, though. One can see that one, sort of ratchets along and makes progress, but it's just unbelievable to me how slow that progress is sometimes. Especially when you know something and then just year after horrid year, it just lingers, But experience will teach you everything as I understand it, because human nature, we are made in certain ways. And the degree to which we harmonize with divine law is the only way I can think of, which is not the same as church dogma. Divine law is the way things are. It's natural law. I mean, the biologist, the physicist, everybody discovers this objective or more or less objective reality of just how things fit together and work. And the same is true for the human being. The science of human consciousness has been the science of the East. The science of the physical world has been the science of the West. So our understanding, I mean in this room, as opposed to their understanding over there, but our understanding of self-realization is based on the teachings of India. Because the yogis and the masters of India have specialized in shutting one's eyes and looking inside and saying what's true. And then thus, scripture, saints, masters, all that teaching, all of the true teachings all come back together, and they say things like, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie. All these rules, they're not really there because there's this God who just is such a party pooper who doesn't want us to have any fun. They're really there because if we live in harmony with those, we discover within ourselves the highest pleasures of all. And it's really about joy, it's not about suffering. So, but everybody has to go through that in their own way, which is this gentleman's question here. Do I have to leave that life in order to have this one? I don't know. Depends on what lessons you're trying to learn. You know, it may be to be a very successful and very rich and very effective whatever is just 100% of right the channel that you need to go down in order to master the next stage of your own development. Or it may be that you're just clinging to it, you know, just trying to get blood from a turnip, when you know in your heart that there's just really nothing of what you're really seeking is there, and yes, you're going to have to put it aside. But only we know that within ourselves. And if we're patient, it gradually shows itself. And sometimes we really want to ditch. I mean, people are different. See, I'm a person who loves to leave things behind. I'm always trying to leave things behind, and I'm always stuck with them, so I'm really different. I mean, I'm always having to just settle back and stay with it. I like to always... But everybody, and some people are very afraid that things will be taken from them, so it just depends on who you are, what happens. Does that answer that? So some of those lawyers are just, you know, they're spending, and you know, you can also be mixed. You can have good karma in certain areas and bad karma in certain areas. You know, there's lots of people that you see. A woman that I remember meeting, you know, she basically said, you know, I'm really good at money. She says, I just make money left and right, but, you know, relationships never work for me. And so, you know, women will say, I'm really good at friendship, and I've done a great job with my kids, but, you know, I've just had husband after husband, and not one of them has ever come together. It's just, that's my remedial area. And so you could have somebody who's very good at certain areas and just good in the sense of noble and true, even in certain areas, but then in others they have a weakness. I have certain people that I know are like that. I mean, somebody can be very attached to money, and that can make them do very strange things, even though in other arenas they can be very noble-hearted. People can be attached to sex and get very strange around that issue, but can be very noble in other areas, or power, or money. I said money, but you understand what I mean. So you have or you have somebody like, let's say, a very effective lawyer who's mastered certain principles. Just as I was saying when we were talking to this man here about, in order to do anything well, you have to make choices. So maybe you have a person who's become a very good lawyer, and they have mastered the art of making choices. They've mastered the art of concentrating and focusing their energy and overcoming all kinds of limiting conditions in their lives. So they've got all that kind of energy together. The object that they're pursuing, you know, may lack nobility, but they've really honed their ability to pursue. And maybe after they experience the fruit of that effort for 1 lifetime or 10 lifetimes, or however many it takes, then they'll raise their eyes to a higher goal. And then that, you know, malicious, avaricious lawyer may be way far ahead of the lady who is concerned about the birds. Because the lady who's concerned about the birds may just have no energy and no capacity to focus or accomplish anything. So even though they're sort of out there concerned about the birds, there's nothing happening. And this lawyer, because he's such an absolutely fabulous shyster, may become, you know, a really great philanthropist really quickly, because he knows how to, this is my goal. So it helps when you think like that, because then you can always just sort of try to see the good in yourself and in others. And just sort of say, well, you know, they're just learning these lessons, and they'll learn them. In the middle of it, it's not always easy to be so detached, but in theory you can. Questions? Yes, David.
This sort of relates to what this gentleman here was talking about when you know, when you're going through a transition. For me, recently, I feel like I've jumped to higher consciousness or a higher awareness very rapidly. You know, it's happening very quickly. And there's a part there's a contradiction between kind of my soul, which is saying, boy, you know, freedom, and then there's something else, you know. It's like you know, it's like yourself kind of split in two, where there's this one part that's
There's one part that has greater awareness than the other part is able to live up to.
right.
Well, there you have it, don't you?
Right. It's like you see like a really
yeah.
part of the mountain, and then, but you can't, right?
But that's an exact analogy. You've gotten to the point where you can look up and say, oh my gosh, look where we could go.
Right.
You know, and you really know that that's where you could go, and you also know that is where you're going. And if you have a sense of expanded reality, you know that because you're going to eventually get there, then in a sense you are there. However, you're not.
Right.
You're here. And you might not even have really put your boots on yet, you know, what to speak of making that hike. But the fact that you know that means that it's absolutely sure that you will get there. And the whole art of the spiritual path, the whole art of life, is how you deal with that fact. So the mere fact of stating it is the whole issue. It's not like, oh, well, here's what you do. No. This is it. And this is the, well, sometimes I call it the icky middle. You know, it's just sort of the icky part. This is the icky part where there's just a lot of walking that has to be done. And a great deal of it is boring, difficult, unsatisfying, frustrating, at best, you know. And other parts of it are just glorious because, you know, you hike through certain valleys that are really lovely and you enjoy them, or certain parts, you know, are just wonderful, but others aren't. And the difference between those who actually really get to the garden, to the mountaintop in a smooth flow, and those who don't, are those who are able to work with this. So you don't get there faster by constantly being offended by this, or thinking there's something wrong with you, or trying to cheat. You know, just try to cheat somehow by, hey, I heard about a guy over here for $10 will sell you tickets, you know, and you just buy one of these tickets and then you go through a wormhole and you can get there and it's no effort, you know. You can't cheat. It's just a really long walk. And every single aspect of your nature is going to have to be changed before you get there. And Swamiji, on a video that we were looking at recently, someone asked him to talk about patience. And he said the proverb, patience is the fastest way to God. Patience is the fastest way to God. Because there's also an element of ego in impatience. And that's the secret of it. You see, ego says, well, I can see the mountaintop, so therefore I am the mountaintop. And nothing in you really is that mountaintoppy, except just this little piece of you that can see it. The rest of you, if you just really look at it, is pretty much right on the plains or in the city. You know, it's just pretty much doing all the stuff that the plains in the city do. And as I was saying, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way it is. But and you've got to build your hike to the mountain. You have to build it from where you are with the equipment that's in your hands. And if the ego says, no, I don't. You know, I see the mountaintop. I am the mountaintop. I don't have to really work hard. I don't have to meditate. I don't have to follow this. I don't have to do that. Fine. But you know, the people who are just following that are going to be just plodding boringly along. And a long time later, you'll still be sitting there. So having just the humility to recognize just because I have a great destiny doesn't mean that I don't have to work for it too. That's the paradox of the spiritual path, is that you have a great destiny, but you also have to work for it. And this gentleman, that was what he was saying. You know, he wasn't protesting about it, but if it's mine already, how come I have to work for it? I don't know why. I think it's a lousy system. We all think it's a lousy system. But the saints say it isn't. And I think that's no comfort, but you know, it just tells you that there's no point in worrying about it. And so we just basically try to have a good time. We have a joke in our community, especially in the summer, that the path to God is just one great weekend after another. Because sometimes we just have really one great weekend after another. Great weekend means, inspiring events, not binges. But because the path to God isn't one great weekend after another, that's why we say it. It's a lot of hard work, but it's also, why not enjoy it? And you're not going to, patience is the fastest way to get there. You might as well just enjoy every stage of the way because you're going to have to go through it. And that's, we all cry ourselves to sleep on a regular basis because of the valleys we're in. And that's just also part of it. But then after you're lying there for a long time just being utterly distressed, you say, well, are you done? Are you done? I thought once when I was just falling into one of those chasms, I actually said to myself, what are you going to do? Are you going to commit suicide? And I said, no, I don't think so. Then I said, then don't waste time because you're just going to you're going to just get really depressed, you're going to get really sad, you're going to get really tired, you're going to just get really distracted, and then you're going to get better. Because you're not going to quit, so what's the point? All that's happening is I'm still here. I've been talking about that mountaintop for so long. My position is really awful. But and we're not there. But then I just say, well, so what? Let's just go on. We will be. That's the good news. And Yogananda said, relatively soon. Swami once said that to me, do this, do that, and everything else will follow in relatively short order. Sir, relatively short order. What does that mean? Relative to what? I think relative to how long we wandered without even knowing where the mountaintop was. And that we wandered for that for a really long time, so by the time we see it, Yogananda says, we are just about home. The image that I've heard is, if it was a 24-hour clock, like this, by the time you actually have an understanding where you're going, you are in the last few seconds compared to how long it takes you to get to there. But that doesn't mean that that's not a little while in terms of our human minds, but we're really close. That's very, very sure. Because I'm not going to have time to take another question, so I'll have to look back. Okay. Good enough? Right. Why don't we do some ohms, chanting ohms of the chakras? Swamiji also said on that same tape, he said the secret is to live in the now. He said, because otherwise, he said, you will only ever have the present moment, and otherwise you'll miss it. And it's only now, so if you just live in the now, then you'll always be fine, instead of living in the future. It's something that you hope will happen.